Hi everybody, welcome back. So I was playing around with my Gemini and watching some videos on YouTube, and I see there's a lot of videos with the new outline die that I think is being released by Simon Says Stamp. So after watching a couple videos, I'm like, I wonder if I can do that, of course, with my Gemini. So we're going to do partial die cutting with the Gemini to make these cards here. And this is not a partial die cutting die. This die actually cuts all the way through. Somewhere on this horrible desk of mine, I have a cutout, which will eventually turn up, I'm sure. But this die actually cuts all the way through, and I turned it into this. So this is all one piece. And you probably have dies already that you can do this technique with. So I made a little belly band with vellum, and all you do is just fold the vellum over and glue it on the back, and you want to leave it enough room so you can slide it off, and you can see we have this beautiful card. Okay, so let's get to it. Alright, so the first thing you want to do is you want to start with a piece of heavy duty cardstock. I think this is it's either Basil or Die Cuts with a View. I'm sorry, I don't know what brand it is. It's a like a periwinkle color. So it has some shimmer on the top. You can see there's texture there, and then it's flat on the bottom. I have this cut to 5.5 by 10. Okay. The die that I'm going to be using is the So Detailed Thinlits die. I believe this is current. I'm not a Stampin' Up! Representative. You would have to contact your Stampin' Up! Representative, but there's the number 142751 if you would like to contact someone from Stampin' Up! Here you can see the die, and as I said before, the die very clearly cuts off at the bottom here. Okay. So after our paper is cut, again, 5.5 to 10, we want to score it at about the 2.5. So we're going to start at one end, and at 2.5, we're going to score it, and then we're going to turn our paper over, and at 2.5 we are going to score it again. And at this point, if you want to fold your flaps in, it might make it a little easier later when it comes to assembling the card. Okay. Next, what we're going to do is the partial die cutting technique. So, I'm going to bring my little Gemini Jr. over. And what we're going to do is we are going to start with our cutting plate. And the side that we want to cut is usually the pretty side. And I have some Scotch Post-it tape here. And what I'm going to do is basically, so this is a cutting edge and this is a cutting edge. So there's two cutting edges on here. And I don't want to cut past this line here, because if I cut here, it will detach the paper. All this cutting edge is doing is it's cutting the floral design. If I cut to here, then that's going to disconnect this whole piece from the paper, and I don't want that. So here it is. Here's what it looks like, right? So we want it to stop right here. We don't want it to cut all the way to this edge here. So we're going to put our die face down on the paper. We have our score line here. We want the top edge just past that score line. So here, I'll show you what I mean here. Let me just put this down. This way. So we want it to cut to there. We do not want it to cut down to the bottom line. So we have our scored edge right in between there. Because if we cut all the way to the line, to there, it will cut the image out, and we do not want the image to be detached. And with this die, you can actually go all the way up to the top here, and it should line up straight. Okay, so that's part one. You want to make sure that that's stuck down pretty good. Part two is to line it up on your die. So now what you're going to do is you're going to, on your cutting plate, is you are going to take this on your cutting plate. You're going to turn the paper around so that it hangs off the edge of your cutting plate. So we have our cutting plate over here and nothing over here. And again, you want to line your cutting plate up to your score line. So you don't want it to go, you want it to pass this first part of the die, land somewhere in the middle, and not to go down to this part. So our cutting plate stops at my score line. You guys see that? So there's the first cut line, cutting plate, second cut line. Now we're going to make our sandwich. So I'm going to use the Milky cover sheet on top. And then the magnetic sheet. I don't like using the magnetic sheet right on top of the die because it does shift my dies. So I'm not going to use that there. You can see from my sandwich that just the teeniest part of the edge is hanging off of the die. So the die is hanging out there just barely. That's what you want. Now, we're going to put this through this way first so that the paper hangs out the end. I love this machine, in case you haven't picked up on that. I just can't stop coming down here and playing with this machine. I really wish I had gotten one sooner. And look at that, everything cut right out. Now these little corners down here that it didn't cut, I'm just going to snip those off. All right, so now we have one side done. All right, so I know you want to see it again because it's a little tough to get, and even when I do it, I still have to think about what I'm doing. So we're going to take our cutting plate. We're going to take our paper face up. And you know what? They're not mirror images. That's okay. I think with the floral design, it doesn't have to be completely symmetrical. And we are going to line up our score line in the middle of our die. So our score line is right here, right in the middle of the die. Okay, that's the easy part. Everybody gets that part. The hard part is, how do I make sure I don't cut past it? You make sure you don't cut past it by not having a cutting plate down there. Or there's another way you could do it. You could leave the cutting plate on there and just line up your top plates so they only cut that way. But I'm always afraid that it'll shift, so it's just easier just to hang it off the edge. So hang it off the edge. So the score line lines up with the edge of our cutting plate. And then I'm going to use the Milky plate or the magnetic shim, whatever you're more comfortable with. One or the other. And then your top cutting plate. And now we are going to feed it through backwards. Now mine slid out of the sandwich there, but that's okay. We can still see the score lines. And we want to line up the score lines with the edge of the plate. And feed that through. And you can see just the teeniest, tiniest hanging out the top of the die there. You can see most of those pieces fell out pretty easily. And again, we just want to trim these little corner pieces here. Very good. All right, so now we have the outside of the card done. We want to do the inside pretty easy. So now it looks like we bought some really expensive fancy die that cut our card into these fancy folds when actually we did it ourselves. Okay, so then we have to mat the inside. So I have a little black piece here which is cut to, I believe, 4.5 by 5. Center that and stick that down. All right, and we want to stamp our sentiment. The sentiment I'm going to be using is the Happy Birthday sentiment from Mama Elephant. I love this sentiment because of how large it is, and it's that nice scripty font. Our inside layer is 4 1/4 by 4 3/4, so 1/4 inch smaller than our mat. Now, I'm going to be using my anti-static tool. And I'm going to be stamping in ink color Wisteria by My Favorite Things. So the tip someone gave me once when I first started out was to find paper that matches your ink. I know oftentimes we start stamping out an image and then we try to find paper to match it. But if you start with the ink and find the paper to match, it's a little easier. You can customize the paper, but just to give you an idea there. But this ink and this paper do match up nicely. So because this is a dye ink, we're not going to be able to emboss with this. So I'm going to show you a trick. If you don't have embossing powder that matches your project, how you can make it on your own. It's pretty simple. And I'm using my little mini Misty here because I know that my stamp, it's well loved, and in the middle it doesn't always stamp so dark. So I think I stamped this 3 times. And there we go. Now, if you would try to put embossing powder over top of this, it won't stick because it's a dye ink and it's already dried and absorbed into the paper. So what we're going to do is we're going to clean our stamp off real quick. And we're going to use our Versamark ink. And because we use the Misty, it will line up perfectly. And with the Versamark, you only need to stamp once. And now we're going to use Ranger Clear Fine embossing powder over top. So even though I don't have the embossing powder to match, I have the ink to match, and by putting VersaFine and clear powder over it, it'll all look like it goes together. And now we're going to heat emboss it. Another tip is if you feel that your embossing powder is a little bumpy and maybe you didn't get enough coverage, we can put this back into the Mini Misty, stamp it with the VersaFine again, and put some more embossing powder on there. And I'm pretty happy with that. embossing powder all over the desk. All right, and then the last part is you want to just put some sequins in there, and then to make a belly band, I just cut a piece of 8.5 by 11 vellum paper. I don't have really thick vellum. This is a pretty thin vellum. This is 1.5 inches wide, and I'm just going to kind of center it over the card, and then gently fold down the edges, flip it over. And then just use a glue dot or a little bit of adhesive on one side there. And you have a cute belly band. And you know, you can stamp something on there. I would not recommend heat embossing this vellum because it will warp because it's a very thin vellum. And then, like I said, putting some sequins on there, signing your greeting. And we have a cute, very nice, partially embossed card. So there you go, guys. If you have any questions, please post them below. Thanks for watching. Again, I appreciate your thumbs up and sharing the video. We are up to over 1,500 subscribers now. So I'm very excited about that. And I love showing you guys these tips and techniques with playing with the Gemini. I did just post a video on using a gatefold embossing folder from Anna Griffin and using your Gemini for that. I will warn you, it was a rough video. There are some times on there where it looks like I'm blowing up my Gemini, but it came out okay in the end. But there you go, guys. Thanks for watching. Keep on stamping.